The period leading up to the outbreak of the Second World War was marked by heightened tensions, political maneuvering, and military preparations across Europe. The Kingdom of Yugoslavia, like many other nations, faced numerous challenges in its efforts to modernize and strengthen its military. These attempts were hindered by various factors, including economic constraints, political instability, a complex geopolitical situation in Europe, and limited resources. Despite these challenges, Yugoslavia recognized the need to modernize its army. Acquisition of armored vehicles from Czechoslovakia for their motorized forces was one such attempt. While 8 H-1D tankettes would be acquired, these efforts proved to be insufficient to adequately prepare for the oncoming conflict with the Axis forces that was to come in April of 1941. During the 1930s, major armies in Europe were slowly modernizing their cavalry units by attaching various mechanized elements, including armored vehicles. These efforts were part of the broader trend in the interwar period, as many nations were experimenting with armored vehicles and tactics, foreseeing the importance of mechanized warfare. Not wanting to be left behind in this new arms race, the Yugoslavian army decided to implement a similar reorganization of its 2 cavalry divisions. In 1934, plans were made to include a motorized regiment in each division. It was also to be supported by an armored vehicle detachment containing either light tanks or tankettes. At that time, the Yugoslavian army had in its inventory some 60 aging Renault FTs and its modified M28 counterpart. These were obviously obsolete tanks with limited mobility that were not suited for the needs for a fast-moving motorized detachment. So, the Yugoslavian army sent military delegations around Europe in search of a suitable vehicle. Europe at that time was getting deeper into a political fracture between the Western Allies and Germany. Countries that had a good relationship with Yugoslavia, such as France, wanted to dispose of their older surplus models first, keeping the newer models for themselves in case of war with Germany. These older designs were not appealing to the Yugoslavian army officials, so they turned to the other potential candidates. These included Poland, Czechoslovakia, and even the Soviet Union. Czechoslovakia had a good level of cooperation with Yugoslavia. Both countries were members of the so-called Little Entente, the alliance formed in the early 1920s between Yugoslavia, Romania, and Czechoslovakia. In 1933, the TKD and Škoda weapon manufacturers presented a few different tankette designs to a Yugoslavian delegation. The TKD VZ-33 tankette, after a brief examination, was rejected. Škoda's Mu-4 performed poorly during testing. Despite this, the Yugoslavian delegation was still interested in it and asked if its performance could be improved for another test run. The engineers replaced the Mu-4 engine and made some other minor modifications. This vehicle was tested by the Yugoslavian army in October of 1934. While performing much better, and despite the initial negotiation for 40 such vehicles, nothing came from this. Škoda, however, had another ace up its sleeve. In 1935, work on a new vehicle was initiated. In contrast to previous tank designs, this particular version was to be armed with a 37mm gun and a machine gun. The prototype, which was designated H-1D, was completed by mid-1935. That same year, it was presented to the Yugoslavian army, which showed great interest in it. After evaluation and testing, some changes were requested before an agreement was to be signed, mainly including increased frontal armor protection. The Ministry of the Army and Navy of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia and Škoda finally signed a contract on the 30th of June 1936. According to this contract, 8 such improved tankettes were bought at a total price of nearly 6 million Czechoslovak crowns to be completed and transported to Yugoslavia within the next 11 months. Due to delays in production, these were finally delivered in 2 batches, with the first one arriving on the 14th of August and the second one on 25th of August 1937. In Yugoslavian service, these were known as the fast fighting vehicle T-32. The Yugoslav army at that time did not use the term tank or tankette. While the 8 vehicles were delivered, the prototype remained at Škoda. It would remain there until April 1940, when a German SS delegation bought it. It was delivered to Germany in July 1940, and from that point on, its ultimate fate is unknown, but it was likely scrapped. The hull of this vehicle was divided into 3 sections. The front part of the hull housed the transmission, followed by the crew compartment and the engine. Its suspension consisted of 2 pairs of road wheels suspended by leaf spring units and 1 additional road wheel suspended on a vertical spring per side. There was also a front drive sprocket, rear idler, and 4 return rollers. The T-32 was powered by a 60 horsepower at 2,500 rpm petrol engine that provided a maximum speed of 41 km per hour. With a fuel load of 115 liters, the T-32 had an operational range of 260 kilometers. The superstructure was box-shaped, with the opening for the gun placed in the front armor plate. There were 2 observation ports placed on each side of the gun, and an additional visor port placed to the right of the driver. The superstructure top was mostly flat, with a small portion of it being slightly curved toward the front of the vehicle. On the left, a large round-shaped command cupola was positioned, with a much simpler hatch for the driver next to it. The commander could observe the surroundings through 4 large observation ports, each placed to cover one side of the vehicle. The T-32's front armor was 22 to 30 mm thick, depending on the source. The side armor was 12 mm and the rear was 8 mm thick, while the vehicle's bottom was only 5 mm thick. For its small size, the T-32 was remarkably well armed. Its main armament consisted of a Škoda 37mm UVJ gun. Part of the gun and its upper recoil cylinder were protected with a steel jacket, and it had an elevation of -10 degree to +25 degree, while the traverse was 15 degree in both directions. It could penetrate some 30 mm of armor at 500 meters and carried between 25 to 42 rounds, depending on the source. Secondary armament included a machine gun positioned in a small ball mount on the right side of the vehicle's superstructure. The ammunition load for this machine gun consisted of 1,000 rounds. The T-32 had a crew of 2, including the commander and the driver. The commander was positioned on the left side of the vehicle, and his jobs included operating the main gun, finding targets, loading the gun, and firing it. The driver, who was positioned on the right side, operated the machine gun. This arrangement greatly diminished the effectiveness of the crew, as they were simply overburdened with the different tasks that they had to perform. Despite the appearance of an anti-tank or an assault vehicle, the T-32 was meant to perform a few different tasks, including reconnaissance of enemy flanks and attacks on enemy flanks and vital defense points, but only in cooperation with other units. Frontal direct attacks were to be avoided as much as possible. These were only permitted when the enemy was caught off guard and if sufficient artillery support was available. The T-32 could act as a vanguard when a platoon would be divided into 2 groups of 2 vehicles. The first group would advance, while the second would remain in reserve. In rearguard operations, the T-32 was to attack enemy flanks and thus slow down their movements. Once in Yugoslavia, these 8 vehicles were used to form the Fast Combat Vehicle Squadron. This unit was divided into 2 platoons, each with 4 vehicles, supplemented by 2 armored cars and 2 improvised armored trucks. The squadron was stationed at the cavalry school near Belgrade. While more modern than other armored vehicles in the service of the Yugoslavian army, the T-32 performance was disappointing. While it possessed good firepower, its weakest part was a poor suspension design, which made it prone to frequent breakdowns. This, in turn, meant that only a few vehicles were operational at any given time, while the remaining ones had to be sent to an army workshop for repair. In the lead-up to the war with the Axis powers that began in April 1941, the T-32 were extensively used in various military exercises and occasionally on parades. It was involved in military exercises at Ada Ciganlia near Belgrade in 1940, which were actually the site of the first ever recorded color documentary videos made in Yugoslavia. In March 1941, the government of Yugoslavia was negotiating with the Germans in regard to joining the Axis powers. A group of pro-Western Yugoslav Air Force officers staged a coup on the 27th of March 1941 in order to prevent this from happening. They were supported by the R-35 tanks, which were deployed at key locations in the capital, Belgrade. the T-32 were not initially involved, but would participate in the parade in honor of the success of the coup later that day. After initial experience with the T-32, the Yugoslav military leadership asked Škoda to develop better armored and armed vehicles with a more reliable suspension. In 1939, Škoda presented an improved tankette designated Š-1J. It incorporated a number of improvements, mainly regarding armament and suspension. The Yugoslav army was pleased with this new model and was interested in purchasing 108 such vehicles. However, nothing came of it. Just prior to the Axis attack on Yugoslavia on 6 April 1941, all 8 T-32s were based in Zemun. Their primary mission was to protect the capital Belgrade from any possible enemy attack from the north or an airborne assault. While the Axis attack was anticipated, the Yugoslav military planners failed to estimate the sheer size and speed of its advance. Almost from the start, the Yugoslav army was in complete disarray and chaos, with the majority of units failing to fully mobilize their manpower. The squadron of fast combat vehicles did not participate in the war up to the 10th of April. The unit received an order to move to the city of Niš to establish a new base of operations there. At least one T-32 had to be abandoned in Belgrade due to a mechanical breakdown. This particular vehicle was then captured by the advancing Germans. As the remaining T-32 were advancing toward their objective, the order was changed and they were sent to the city of Topola. The unit arrived at Topola on the night of the 10th of April. On the following day, the unit set up defensive positions, and around 10 p.m., 2 T-32s were ordered to carry out a reconnaissance mission toward the city of Kragujevac. The communication lines with the city were lost and the current position of the enemy advance was not clear. Unfortunately for them, the Germans were already in Kragujevac and dispatched a small crew of tanks towards their direction. While on the way to their objective, one T-32 had a mechanical breakdown and had to be abandoned, and the second vehicle continued on its own. The T-32 unexpectedly got in the path of the advancing German tanks. Both sides were probably surprised before the German tanks opened fire. The lone T-32 had to pull back to safety, but on the way back, it also had to be abandoned due to a mechanical breakdown. At 1 p.m., the Germans attacked the Yugoslav Topola defensive positions. By this point, at least 5 T-32s were still operational. In a counterattack attempt, the T-32s managed to temporarily stop the German advance. The unit commander's vehicle alone managed to destroy 3 German tanks, including a command vehicle. After 3.5 hours of fighting, the Yugoslav positions were finally overrun, and the fate of the defending T-32 is not clear. Some may have escaped the destruction of the Yugoslav forces in Topola and moved to Mladenovac, where they were finally lost. The Germans managed to capture at least some of these vehicles in various conditions. In their army, the T-32 was renamed to Panzerkampfwagen 732J. The precise fate of these is not known. What is sure is that not all available vehicles were used by the Germans during the occupation of Yugoslavia. It is very likely that all the captured tankettes were eventually sent for scrap metal at some point during the Second World War. This concludes our video on the Yugoslavian T-32 tankettes. What do you think of this small boxy vehicle? Was it the best tankette to have designed in the pre-war years? Share your opinions in the comment section. If you haven't done so already, we invite you to subscribe to stay updated on future content. If you'd like to contribute further, consider supporting us on Patreon or PayPal. Your contributions help us create more engaging videos. Until next time, stay focused and stay tuned.